Alright, welcome to our first real video lecture. This lecture is primarily going to discuss something that a video that I had you watch on YouTube discussed last week, and that is the Toulmin model. A couple of things about why we're focusing on this so much. The first thing is I'll try in normal circumstances not to be as repetitive, but the Toulmin model is absolutely foundational to this and many other kind of contemporary argumentation classes, and there are certain parts of it that people struggle with at first. So some of this might be repetitive, but please bear with me because I promise that it will help you a little bit in the future. The second is you might be wondering why you're learning a little bit of a different model than you might have learned in other classes. So perhaps you've taken a formal logic class before, or maybe you've just studied this in another context of some sort. You might have done a bunch of fancy stuff with equations like if A plus B equals C, etc., that type of thing. That's actually the type of formal logic that Toulmin is criticizing and using in an argumentation context. So the context behind this is there was this guy, Stephen Toulmin, and one thing that he noticed is that the way that argumentation is typically taught usually involves describing situations where argumentation could look like that but actually doesn't. In other words, he thought that the way that argumentation has been taught in argumentation classes previously might not be reflective of the ways that people make arguments in the real world. And so what he did is try to design a model which has many more parts than the three that we're focusing on for now, about what people actually do when they make arguments. So we're going to focus once again on the first three parts of this model, the claim, the data, and the warrant. Definitionally, once again, the claim is just your main thesis statement of what you're trying to prove with your argument. The second part is data, which is the evidence used to support your claim. The third part is warrant, which is the part that people really struggle with, which just connects the data to the claim. So another way of thinking about this is it asks the question, why does the data make the claim true? And this often has something to do with values. In other words, why do we value the data over other potential data points to make sure that the claim is accurate? So the claim here, just in the example that I'm about to give you, and I'll give it on both sides, so if you disagree with this, it's not about that, don't freak out. One claim that you could make is that abortion is wrong. You'll notice that that claim is extremely concise. That is always how you want to be with your claims. It is always better to have a shorter, more concise claim because it's very important that people know your position on a topic before you go any further. There's a lot of different data that you could choose to support that claim, but in this case, let's say our data set is that fetuses can live at very young ages, and medical data shows that abortion is technically murder. So you've chosen that data to try to support your argument. Now, you've probably heard both of those things before, and maybe thought through some of these issues before if you've ever thought about abortion politics, but what comes next is the tricky part, which is the warrant. Now, remember, the warrant is supposed to prove that the data mandates the claim or that the data makes the claim true, and it usually has to do with values. So, in this case, in order to figure out what the warrant to the argument is, we want to figure out why does medical data that shows that it could be murder or that fetuses could live at very young ages prove the claim that abortion is wrong? And maybe one way that you could phrase the warrant in this case is that we should prioritize life over other values. Therefore, the data that it could technically be murder is absolutely very important. Now, remember, in a lot of debates that you might see in the real world, the warrant is implied. It's not necessarily explicitly stated, although sometimes, of course, it is. All right, so once again, the claim is abortion is wrong. The data is that fetuses can live at very young ages and that medical data shows that it's technically murder. And the warrant is that we should prioritize life over other values and that the data matters. Now, let's take the opposite argument and also use that as an example to demonstrate the Toulmin model. All right, so in that case, the claim would be that abortion is an ethically and morally sound choice. The data set, and once again, you could choose many of these things, might be women get put into bad situations if they're not allowed to have abortions, survivors of rape and assault will be traumatized, and your warrant, in other words, what proves that the data is important to the claim, which shows your values, the warrant might be women's bodies and choices should be prioritized in public policy making decisions. People really get lost in the debate over the data and the warrant. And here's a couple of things about having a good argument with someone. First of all, you should never really just be throwing claims back and forth. Now, if you've diagrammed this, you can see why this would be a problem in this case, because that would literally just be saying, abortion is wrong. And the other person would be saying, abortion is an ethically and morally sound choice, and there's no substance to that argument. So when you're having an actual argument with someone, you want to be focused on either the data or the warrant. Sometimes both, but typically, and at least at this stage, it's one or the other. So if you were on the pro-abortion side of things, you could either choose to attack the data of the other side's argument. So in this case, you could contest the claim that medical data would indicate that it's murder, or you can contest the warrant. You should say, we should not prioritize extremely young new life over other values. We should prioritize women, right? You can choose to either attack the data or the warrant. Now, on the other side, you could once again either choose to attack the data or the warrant. So you might say something like, to attack the data, women aren't necessarily in bad situations because there's a lot of organizations out there to help them. Or you could attack the warrant, which is just that we should prioritize all lives, not just women's lives, right? One thing that I'll note is that in these situations, I'll always give examples on both sides of the political spectrum, because it's not about what I think about a particular issue, it's about how we construct arguments to get there. So before I go on, I want you to pause the lecture really quickly and think of one example of any political issue that you can think of and write out a claim, a data, and a warrant for each of those things. I know that you did this in class last week, but just since you're getting better at this, choose a political issue and do this. And if you bring that as part of your notes to class, I think that will help you a lot with what we do in class. So I'm just going to assume that you're going to pause now. And I'm going to continue with just a few more notes on the Toulmin stuff. The first is I want to connect this a little bit to the book. The book actually does not talk about Toulmin until way later in the semester, and by that point I'll probably just have you skip over it. I think that's a little bit of a mistake because it really is foundational to not just understanding arguments, but being able to do things with arguments. But I do want to connect this stuff to one book concept that the book does bring up in Chapter 1, which hopefully you have read by now. The book discusses Argument 1 and Argument 2 as two different meanings of the word argument. So Argument 1 is in the book is maybe me making a statement that global warming is going to kill us all, right? So that would be in Argument 1. It's just kind of a thesis statement about something that's going on in the world. Argument 2 is what you might think of as getting into an argument with someone. So you might say, I had an argument about global warming with someone. Of course, that wouldn't just be you making a statement. That would be you having a back and forth with someone. You should primarily think of Toulmin as related to Argument 1, in other words, just getting good at making statements about the world, but that something will ultimately help you in Argument 2 when you're actually having arguments with other people. But for now, we're going to focus on Argument 1. You will never need to know which one of those is called Argument 1 and Argument 2. You will just need to know that there are two different meanings of the term argument. Now, I promised myself I would keep this under 10 minutes, and I'm almost there, so I'm going to stop. Take a minute and then please move on to the next lecture.